What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of WNBA Today on CLNS, and we're going to talk one of my favorite teams to watch this year, the Portland Fire, with none other than Sean Highkin. Sean, how's it going today?
Great. How about you? You're one of many people that's told me, from out of market, that's told me, hey, the Fire are one of my favorite teams to watch this year, and that's a lot of people.
Yeah, and for me, I've been trying to figure out what it is that has compelled me. Number one, I just love expansion teams. I loved the Valkyries last year. I love watching the Tempo as well. They're right up there for my league pass teams, because on paper you think they're going to be really bad because they should be from a roster construction standpoint in theory. Although I'm starting to change my view of that. And then you see that they're super competitive, and the Fire winning these early games versus the Liberty, and those are obviously thrilling games. We can talk more about, but it just it's pretty cool, right? This team on paper, the day after the expansion draft, I looked at the Portland roster and I was like, this team's gonna be pretty bad, like many people. And I love to be wrong about that stuff. So what has been you covered the Portland Trailblazers, you have for a long time. And I know you started covering the Fire right from the expansion news and kind of the lead up to this first season. Before we get into the basketball and what's made this team successful, and we'll talk about the coaching and some of the philosophies there, what's just been the general feeling in Portland in the lead up to getting this team back? And then also just now that the season is underway, how have you just seen the city receive the Portland Fire as a franchise?
Oh, it's been a huge success from all that standpoint. And I knew that it would be. Portland was such a no-brainer city to get a team because, they had a team back in the early 2000s, the original version of the Fire, and they folded, and that was when the league was in a different place financially, and a lot of those teams were folding because they were all owned by NBA teams, and the NBA owners just didn't want to lose money on it, so they just folded it. So, but even back then, the Fire, the original version of the Fire, was getting about 8,000 fans per game, which at the time was one of the best in the league. So even back then, they had their fans, and there were people locally that cared about it. So, and then, you look at what's happened with women's professional sports and even college sports in the region in the 20 years since then. You look at how popular the Thorns are in the NWSL. You look at both the Oregon and Oregon State women's basketball programs and the success that they've had and the fan bases that they have. And, a venue like the Sports Bra, which was the first one of these women's sports only sports bars, I think, that started up in the country and is, huge success business wise, and has led to a lot of, other types of establishments opening in other parts of the country. It just made so much sense when the W started doing this expansion, the effort of the last few years, that Portland would be one of the cities that they would go back to. And so you kind of knew that the fan support was going to be there, and it's been there. And, I've gone to all of their home games so far, and the crowds have been, it hasn't been it has not been like Valhalla, where literally every game from day one is completely sold out and the arena is packed. But even the games that aren't as well attended, it's still really, really loud. And you look at those crowds, I'll give you an example. The second of the two games they played against the Connecticut Sun last week, that was the one that they won pretty easily, and that was also the game where Brittany Griner was not even playing. So a Wednesday night game against the worst team in the league that has the one player that most casual fans have heard of on the team not playing, and it was still a pretty, I don't have the attendance numbers off the top of my head, but it was still a pretty good crowd. It was way better crowd than, I don't know what the NBA equivalent of it would be, a Blazers game in January against Brooklyn or Washington or something like that. It was a way better crowd than that type of game for the Blazers would be. So, the vibe is different. It's just a different vibe. I see a lot of the gear already around town. The players are already huge fan favorites. And I think a lot of that speaks to just, some of the personalities, and also just some of the, the chip on your shoulder, players that were not protected by expansion team stuff that obviously we're going to get into. But when you look at where everything was in the year leading up to the team launching compared to where it is now, because there was definitely some missteps going into the launch. It took them forever to find a team president, and then they fired her after 3 months, and they had to get a retired former Nike executive to basically step in and save it. And then it took them a while to find a general manager. And then, the team name when we found out they were going back to the original Fire name. That happened because they tried to get some other names that they couldn't get the trademarks for, and then the trademark filings ended up leaking, and that was how people found out what the name was going to be. And then you look at the coach that they hired, Alex Sarama, who we're obviously going to get into. Obviously, so far that's worked out incredibly well, but at the time it was like 30-year-old British guy who's never really been a head coach for women at the pro level before. Like, what's this about? And then you look at, what they did in the draft, which is the same thing that Golden State did last year and drafted a European player that's not even going to come over this year when there were some big college stars still on the board. And there was a little bit of people going in like, I don't know. I don't know what this is going to look like. And then, as soon as it started, the first game, they lose that game to Chicago by 15 points. So that it wasn't like, they got their win in their first ever game. But it was still, because it was the opener, it was, that one was a sellout. It was packed. Everything as far as game ops, game presentation, all that stuff was incredible. And even though they lost, like, they still played hard, and they were just at such a talent disadvantage, especially in that matchup, because Camila Cardoso, whenever there's a big like that, they just don't really have anything they can do with them. And then they win their second game against New York, and Ashlee Barker gets that put back at the buzzer, and now it's like you've got your first win, you've got your first like legendary, iconic moment, and since then, I think everything after that has just been like a bonus. But it doesn't hurt that they're winning a lot more than I think people expected them to, and I will fully admit that you said you thought they weren't going to be very good going into the season. I will fully admit that. After the opener, I wrote that they had better just start printing their Juju Watkins jerseys for next year now, because they'll be lucky to win 10 games. We're a month into the season. They're already at 6. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the L on that one for sure.
Yeah. And it's funny because you look, they're 6-5, currently the 8th best record in the WNBA. They have some clutch time wins, which has been huge. I mean, we talked about the Ashlee Barker shot against the Liberty. I mean, the other win against the Liberty where Carla Leite kind of takes over in crunch time, hits that 3 over Breanna Stewart. And my favorite thing is that I feel like every time I turn the TV on, Carla Leite is hitting a big 3, and then she's like a 20% 3-point shooter. So it seems to be like kind of reserves those for those big moments. I think it was Ashlee Barker that had the N1 fast break play against the Sun. Like their plus minus right now is -3 on the season. So they're getting outscored on average, but they found ways to win close games, and that's why they're an above 500 team right now, which is what you have to do, right? When you're an expansion team and you're not going to have the most talented squad. Portland, Toronto is right there. They're 5-4. So both of those teams have been positive surprises. And then the Valkyries, I think, have been one of the best teams in the league so far this season. And so it's really cool to think, because, we know more expansion teams are on their way. It's cool to think that it's not like a death sentence, like you're going to be really bad for a long time. And I wonder if it's the same, we both cover the NBA as well. I wonder how different it would be in the NBA. I think it might be a little bit different, but on the W side, like they've gone international, and I think that's been kind of a cheat code to putting together these rosters. I guess looking at the actual makeup of this team, if you have to attribute the success to a couple people, like, and obviously it's more than just a few, like who's really stood out to you in the early weeks here of the Fire season?
Well, so it's interesting because if you ask me who the 2 best players on the team are, at least, or have been so far, the 2 people I would say would be the 2 that you'd probably expect, which are Bridget Carleton and Carla Leite. If you ask me who I think the 2 players are that most just embody the identity of the team and are the most just integral to the way that they play, the 2 names that I would say are Ashlee Barker and Emily Engstler, who, especially lately, like what she's been doing on, like, especially, in that Indiana game, she had a couple, like, it was mostly Megan Gustafson who was put on Aaliyah Boston, but, Emily had a couple of like blocks, and as a 6'1" player, guarding, people like her and Stewie and like, bigger players like that, like she's leading the league. I'll have to check if this is true, but as of the game before their last game, she was leading the league in blocks as a 6'1" player, and she, her offense has gotten a lot more consistent, I think, from where it was the last couple of years in Washington and wherever else. So it's like she's somebody that I think has really come on. And then Ashlee, obviously, not even just the the putback that she had in that first game, but she also, that game you mentioned against Connecticut, she had that and one, and then she also had one play like around that same sequence where she just like completely just Well, the 3-pointer, but also just on the other end, she just strips Brittany Griner. Brittany has the ball like up, at the top of the key, and Sarah Ashlee just comes in and just like strips her. And then at a different point, she also just like forces a jump ball against her. So she's doing it at both ends. And it's just, to your point about, these expansion teams not being a death sentence. I think that is probably going to change as more teams come in, and it's just, the talent pool gets a little bit more diluted, but we're still at the point right now where after, this was true obviously of Golden State last year, but even with this expansion draft with Portland and Toronto both picking, there were only 13 teams in the league. And there's only 12 roster spots on each team. It's not like the NBA where it's 15 plus the 3 two-ways that teams had that they could protect and, whatever else. So if you're Portland or Toronto and you're drafting the 6th or 7th best player on all of the existing teams, just because there are so few teams and the talent is so concentrated, if you're drafting like the middle of the roster on all of the existing teams, you're going to get some pretty good players, even, and it's just, and especially, the types of players that, these teams are going to target are going to be players like, Bridget Carleton, who's been, on winning teams and has been a role player on winning teams, but clearly like is capable of more and is just, just needs the opportunity. Or, somebody like Carla Leite, who Vanya, the GM, obviously saw up close last year because she also picked her in the expansion draft with Golden State last year. You're going to be able to, you're going to get some pretty good players who, your scouts can say, okay, well, this player just didn't get an opportunity. Sarah Ashlee is another one of those, a former top 10 pick who just didn't get on the floor really with LA last year. And I think the other part of it is that when you're an expansion team, you get to, the GM gets hired, the GM hires the coach, and obviously the GM is going to hire the coach based on this is what the vision is of like, this is the way I want my team to play. I'm going to hire a coach that's in line with that. And then the GM and the coach they don't have any like, well, the last GM drafted this player. I don't think they're that good, but like, I've still got them on the roster, or this, this player doesn't fit with the coach's system, but I've still got them. And we've got to kind of figure out how to make it work or figure out how to trade them. You can just build a team completely from scratch and just self-select for the types of players that fit exactly what you want to do and start from zero. And I think that's, for both Portland and Toronto, that's been an advantage where like they both had their specific visions for this is how we want to build the team. And you can just completely start with a blank slate and get as close to that as possible.
Yeah, it's just really cool. And when you think about it, like I've covered the Connecticut Sun a decent amount being in Boston. And like, they're kind of the inverse of that, where you have a bunch of young players. I don't think they all fit perfectly together. And certainly there's some talent over there, but it doesn't, when you watch them play, there is not a clear identity of like, okay, this is exactly what the Sun are going for. I think they've been more opportunistic, like, oh, we could get Aaliyah Edwards, she's a good player. We could, this is the best available player in this draft. And it's kind of come together like a more classic rebuild, right? Where there's a lot of missteps. Whereas you see like the Valkyries, like there's a very clear defensive identity there, and it has been since day one. And if you hit on some of the, you have to hit, right? Like when Veronica Burton doesn't pan out, then I don't know where we are, right? If Carla Leite is not ready for prime time, then I don't know where we are with the Fire. But it seems like there's a pretty clear formula. Toronto's a little different because of the fact they got this backcourt with Marina Mabry and Brittany Sykes. Like that's a little bit more unorthodox from what we've seen the last few years of like getting those more veteran, like proven players. But even still, it's like the Nyara Sablis of the world, right? Players who were kind of ready to take that leap and just needed an opportunity. And that's what I love watching about the Fire. It's like it's a bunch of players who, like Megan Gustafson, who are talking about how they've been maybe overlooked in the past, waiting for their chance. And so there's just this like baseline level of joy and gratitude that I don't think you see on a normal team, because it's like, by definition, you were not protected by your previous franchise and you were picked to come here. And so there's a level of belief that is, if you're one of the 12 players on the roster, like this level of belief that the front office, the coaching staff has in you. And I think you're seeing kind of the fruits of that confidence, quote unquote. So you mentioned Carla Leite and Bridget Carleton. They've been the Fire's 2 leading scorers. We're recording this on June 3rd. Carla Leite's averaging 15.2 points per game, 5.2 assists. Both of those are team highs. She's shooting 47% from the field, 35.7 from 3. So her numbers have
gone up a little bit.
Yeah. What has stood out most to you about her? I could not be higher on her as like a young player in this league. What stood out most to you about her game and just her as a person from covering her, in Portland?
Well, she's so fast. That's the thing. Like, obviously, after the Indy game, there was all this attention on like just how much they were like having her target Caitlin, and obviously, that's whatever they want to say about Caitlin's defense and whatever else there is that. But I don't know how many defenders would be able to stay in front of Carla just because of how fast she is. She's one of those, like, I have largely tried to avoid like the easy thing to do, with covering a WNBA team that's in the same market as an NBA team, is to kind of make comparisons between players on the two teams. And I always kind of try to avoid doing that just because
I do way too much. I know I do.
Well, I've like consciously tried to avoid doing that because I think it's just kind of a lazy thing. And I think it kind of like diminishes, what, these women who should be like judged. But I think if you want to make like a Blazers to Fire comparison, Carla's game is basically a hybrid of Scoot Henderson and Denny Avdia in terms of like, she's this super fast, like physical point guard who's super fiery, who competes defensively, all that stuff like Scoot, but she gets to the line like Denny. And it's just like, and as far as like her as a person, I've only gotten to talk to her a little bit. And this, obviously you've covered the league a lot more than I have, but with the locker room situation and the very kind of tight windows for access, the one thing that's I've kind of been, little regret a little bit so far is that I haven't really gotten to know too many of these players like on a personal, like I know a lot of them just like to say hi, but like her, Carla's personality, like everyone loves her. She's very positive. She's very she's kind of joyful. Kind of everybody is. I had a little bit of an in with her actually because since I cover the Blazers, she played at Golden State last year with Ilyana Rupert, and the Blazers had her brother Rayon up until the middle of this season, and I know him very, very well. So I had a little bit of an icebreaker with her the first time I like had a conversation with her, and like I know like all those French players are like really, really close with each other. So I had a little bit with that, but like she's still like, I heard that her English was just like barely functional last year in Golden State. It's gotten a lot better now, so like you can have a conversation with her, but no, she's a great personality, and like on court she's super fiery, she's super tough. It seems like a lot all the players kind of gravitate towards her, but you can kind of say that about like pretty much everybody on this team. Like Sarah Ashlee is like that. Meg now that Meg has like moved into the starting lineup the last two games, they put her in for Louisa Geisel-Suter ahead of the Indiana game, and she's also become somebody that kind of as one of the more veterans on the team is somebody that kind of everybody kind of looks to as one of the leaders.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think sometimes I try to figure out like why I gravitate towards certain players. And one of the things that I really like as a viewer, especially if I don't know the players on a personal level, which is most of the W, is seeing the way they react on the court. Like the way she reacts to her own big plays, like you can feel her emotion, like as a viewer
Carla.
at home on the couch at 11 p.m. Like I see, like I think it was the corner three that she hit against the Liberty where she's like skipping up the court. Like I love seeing that as a viewer. And I know a lot of stars, like their thing is that they're very even keeled, and it's good to be that way as you become more veteran. So I get the flip side for sure, but that's something that I really enjoy with her game. And then you mentioned the free throws. I mean, she's getting to the line 6 times a game, and she's shooting 96.3% from the line, which I know it's early days, but it's a good sign that she's a really good free throw shooter when it comes to like, can the 3-point shot come around? Can the mid-range shot come around? Because we know she can get to the basket like very
right.
I had her pegged as one of my front runners for most improved player before the season started, before the expansion draft, actually. Like this was when I was doing mindless, like we were waiting on the CBA and I was just trying to fill up the time. She was one of the players that I had on my list. And at the time that was coming off of like, smaller sample opportunities in Golden State, I did not think she was going to be left unprotected, although doing the math on it, like I get how it happened.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the Valkyries are, they're having a great season. I'm sure they don't regret too much, but I would imagine, I know Natalie Nicosia was asked about this, like, and she was happy for Carla. I imagine there's a little bit of like, okay, maybe we had a star here, even a little more than we realized. But she has a lot of signs about her game that make me think that we're just seeing someone scratch the surface. Her youth, just the jump from last year to this year. Like, I think she's going to be an all-star guard in this league for a while. That's my, I don't even know if that's a hot take, honestly. I think at this point,
Nah,
it's
I don't think so.
not a hot take. And then Bridget, you mentioned the team's second leading scorer right now. She's averaging 14.7 points per game, shooting just under 38% from three. I mean, this is a player that averaged 6 points last year in Minnesota. And when she was the number one overall pick in expansion and gets the Supermax contract, I was thinking to myself, like, that in and of itself is not a great sign for Portland, that a role player, like a fifth option, is going to be their highest player and probably their primary scoring option. And then Bridget Carleton scores 26 against the Liberty and has just looked like much more of a primary creator than I think I had anticipated. She was a great role player for Minnesota. And she always had like an edge about her that I liked, especially for somebody who was kind of like a shooter, right? Like a lot of times those kinds of players, they're not getting involved in like the tussles, but she always was. And I like that about her. But what stood out to you about Bridget as a primary scoring option for Portland ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is the same thing that happened with Kayla Thornton last year in Golden State, right? Where it's like, a player who, didn't really get that much of an opportunity. And then, she was kind of the one that ended up emerging as like, this is like the focal point. This is like the future all-star, all this stuff. And Vanya said that at the expansion draft press conference that they thought she could be an all-star and that, like she said that right away. So like right away, you're putting a lot of pressure on her. And the first couple games, it was rough. Like she wasn't really shooting well from three. And I was kind of looking at it like, I don't know about this. But I think the thing that's kind of undersold about her, obviously the shooting and the scoring. I mean, she's a 3-level scorer because like, yeah, everyone talks about the 3-point shooting, but like she's been so effective from the mid-range too, that I think that's something that's not talked about. Then also just the defense, like, we already talked about like how Emily Engstler is impactful on that end. Bridget Carleton's leading the league in steals right now. So she's got, she's third in steals per game, first in total steals. She's got 21 through 11 games. So, there's that part of it too. And, I think they also just like value having somebody, so much of this team is so young that having somebody, even though she was like the 5th or 6th option with Minnesota for the most part, somebody who's been on winning teams and has played in the finals and has made deep playoff runs and has played and knows how it, what you have to be to play alongside, somebody like an Afisa Collier or whoever, that I think, that was all just like stuff that they looked at. And they clearly, they looked at their metrics and they said, okay, well, her production per minute or per possession, even though it's super low volume, we think that can scale up. And, that as we've seen, we see this in the NBA all the time, teams give, players a bigger opportunity and think that like, oh yeah, because they did this in, 15 minutes a game, they'll be able to do it in 30. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, she has, I think, lived up to what they thought she was going to be when they made her the number one overall pick in the expansion draft.
Yeah, for sure. And in hindsight, like you're right, like there has always been a little bit more to her game, and you just never know how a player is going to embrace that opportunity. And honestly, when Minnesota's offseason played out the way that it did and they lost so much talent, I was like, I didn't really know where Bridget Carleton would fall among that, but she's having probably the best year of anybody that departed. I mean, Jessica Shepard has a case as well. I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at PrizePicks. The NBA Finals are here, but the action doesn't stop when the confetti falls and the NBA crowns a champion, because it's a star-studded, scorching summer of sports. Women's basketball and baseball are heating up. We've got the world's biggest soccer tournament on American soil and the first ever MMA fight on the White House lawn. Make your picks for all these events and more this summer on PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app. I think I'm going to get into soccer this summer with PrizePicks. They're offering everything from group stage winners to goals scored. I'm excited to watch the big stars from countries like Argentina, Brazil, France, and the US and win money while doing it. What's cool is that I can stack game winners from soccer, NBA, the W, and baseball on top of my player picks for even bigger payouts. So now there's even more ways to play and win big when I get my picks right. I can make all my picks in the same app with PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app. PrizePicks is available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Legacies are on the line in the 2026 NBA Finals. Get action on the biggest NBA games of the season and make your picks on everything from points and rebounds to dunks, three-pointers, and fantasy score before the NBA champion is crowned. PrizePicks is a preferred partner of the NBA. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. PrizePicks, a preferred partner of the NBA. Looking at the PrizePicks board for Friday's Game 2 between the New York Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs, I'm going to go with Stephon Castle for more than 11.5 points. Feels like he's due for a big one. And I'm also going to go Dylan Harper for more than 12.5 points. He had a great start to Game 1, so I think he'll build off of that. And I'm also going to go Karl Anthony Towns for more than 14.5 points. All three of those guys, I think, will step up in Game 2 of the finals. Sean, this was recorded timely, recording this on Wednesday afternoon, and Alex Sarama was just named Coach of the Month. He is so fascinating because, like you alluded to earlier in this conversation, like does not have a very conventional path. First-time head coach, young guy, came most directly from the Cavs, but has kind of a circuitous path before that. The big thing that everybody thinks about when they hear the name Alex Sarama is the CLA, right? Like this constraint-led approach. I've seen little bits and pieces about it. I've listened to some podcasts, but from your understanding, being on the ground, how would you explain his coaching philosophy and what makes it different than maybe the average first-year head coach?
So I have a little bit of a different perspective on this than most people because I actually knew Alex already for a few years because before he got hired by the Cavs, he was the director of, this was actually the first job he ever had in the U.S. He was the director of player development for the Blazers G League team, the Rip City Remix, the first year that the Remix launched in 2023. And that happened because, it was Mike Schmitz, who just left to take a job with the Mavericks as their GM. He's super tied in with like a lot of the international stuff. And so is Sergey Oliva, who's one of Joe's other assistant GMs. He and Alex are really tight, and he's also really tight with Vanya. So like the Blazers had some people who kind of ran in those same circles as far as like their, those types of, international, scene and like the relationships that they had. So they brought him over. And then after 1 year, he gets hired by the Cavs, but then he gets hired by the Fire because he and Vanya worked together for the London Lions. And I was a little bit, and like, I wouldn't say I knew Alex well when he was here, but I knew him in passing, always, thought he was a nice guy. And obviously all the Blazers front office folks who I'm very close to in a lot of cases all rave about him and say he's one of the smartest basketball minds they've ever worked with. And so when they made the hire, I was a little bit maybe higher on it than other people were just because I knew a lot of people whose opinions I trust who were vouching for him. I was a little bit skeptical of how it was going to work when he was a head coach because so much of his background is in player development. And when you're a head coach, as you know, whether, in the NBA, the WNBA, any major professional league, so much of the job is managing egos and managing personalities and, that part of the job. And I was like, this 30-year-old British guy who's never really coached women before at the pro level, like, I don't know if that's, how's that going to, as smart as Alex is, like, how's that going to go? So far, you've seen it. The players really love him. They really connect with him. A lot of them have talked about how having a younger coach makes it easier for them to relate to because it's such a young team and they all like that. As far as like his philosophy and the practices and stuff, I'm sure you've seen all the viral clips about how they will be like practicing with just socks, no shoes on to try to just, create another variable. There was this other one where I don't know if this one got reported. I might have tweeted something about it, but there's this. So he's really close with somebody from the Liverpool soccer coaching staff who was doing this also, like their goalkeepers coach, I think for Liverpool, where they got these like glasses, these like dark glasses that basically like flash at different times in different eyes, where it's like they kind of mess with your depth perception and your peripheral vision. And they've like been making players do shooting drills. Basically the idea of like his whole thing is like, the idea is that a game environment is going to be super chaotic and you can maybe have practiced a certain drill or a certain play as many times as you want, but it's never going to run like to perfection in a game. So you just have to like, I think it's less about like, okay, we're running this play. We have to get this play perfect as much as it's about, something unexpected and chaotic is going to happen in a game. How are you going to react to that? How are you going to respond to that? And that's a lot of what that's why they're calling it the constraints-led approach, is because, creating different constraints. Like, the one thing that they do a lot is like, you get the ball and you have a 3-second shot clock and you can only shoot it with your left hand. Like that type of stuff, because like there's going to be a situation in a game where, that's what you have to do because like, you're getting closed out on and there's nobody else is open and you've got to get something up. That's the stuff that they work on. And it's been interesting to kind of see that. And I think part of why it's worked so well, and this is going back to, being able to start from scratch with an expansion team, is that Alex and Vanya have like very intentionally selected like the types of players that are going to be, predisposed to want to buy into something like that. And so because of that, everybody's buying into it very easily. But like the thing that's also really impressed me about it is just that Alex, for somebody who is so young and in this position, and was like kind of a child prodigy in like the coaching and player development world, who had the kind of rapid ascent that he had. But then also like is a guy who has a book about like, see, I've got it right here, but like he's like got a book out and is like a guy that like has been doing clinics and all this stuff and clearly has this philosophy. For somebody who's like that, he does not think that he knows everything or that the way that he does things is the only way to do things. Like half the time I'll ask him about, some thing that I saw them doing in practice, and he'll say like, yeah, I just read a paper about this last month and it completely changed what I think about, this thing that I've thought my whole life. So he's very, for as much as like he has this philosophy that he's very committed to, he's also very curious about hearing other people's perspectives and opinions, and is open-minded to changing something if he sees something that's not, what the way that he had been doing it. And I think players kind of see that and that kind of resonates with him. And I also think he gets the interpersonal stuff a lot more than I maybe thought he would. Like you look at, like, cause remember what happened, I don't know if you saw any like the press conferences and stuff afterwards, but the first Liberty game, Sarah Ashlee hits that the buzzer beating putback, and then we ask her about it, and she basically, she doesn't go into specifics, but she says something about how like she had like a death in the family recently, and she was like going through a whole lot like leading up to that game. And then you hear, we talked to her again the next day, and you hear her talk about the way that like Alex and Vanya have like supported her during like whatever was going on with with her family situation. And it's like, okay, so Alex, even though, he's kind of this like X's and O's genius with this philosophy, he also gets the, the human side of it and the interpersonal side of it more than normally somebody who, who built, made their bones on like having this crazy, unorthodox philosophy maybe would. So I think between those two things, it's that's kind of why it's worked out so well. What I'm going to be really curious to see in a couple of years is, let's say that they kind of build on this foundation. Let's say it goes the way that it went with Golden State last year, where, they have this expansion draft. It's, a lot of kind of mismatched parts. They aren't really able to get anybody in free agency because they're an expansion team. And then they make the playoffs, and then, Golden State is able to go out and sign, somebody like Gabby Williams and, get a real name free agent that way. Let's say that, Portland has like a similar trajectory. They make the playoffs, or they come close to making the playoffs, and then some free agent, some star, kind of more veteran established name comes in next year and wants to sign and wants to be a part of it. Alex, what Alex is doing in his, philosophy and his approach to, coaching and management, that stuff works great when it's a team like this, where it's all younger players who are just happy to have the opportunity, and they're going to do whatever the coach tells them to do because they're just happy to be in this position. A player coming in that's more of an established star and has played a certain way their whole career, is Alex who's maybe made a lot more money already than any of the players that, they have on the roster currently, is Alex going to be able to kind of manage that relationship? Is he going to be able to get somebody like that to buy in or commit to what they're doing when maybe that hasn't been how that's gone, the rest of that player's career? That's the part I'm going to be curious about going forward. But for right now, it's, it's pretty hard to find any real downside to, what's been going on here with Alex.
For sure. And I think something that I've learned just over the last few years of covering the NBA and the WNBA is that there's so many different environments for coaching, and like a coach might be a really good 82 game coach, or in this case,
right,
a 44 game coach. But then in the playoffs, they're not necessarily like a playoff series adjustment coach, or a coach might be really good for player development and when there's no expectations, but when they're managing a bunch of stars and egos and things like then it's a little bit different, right? So, that's why I think it's so hard to find coaches that stay in one place for so long, right? Because those circumstances around them change. But it does seem like right now for this particular group, for an expansion team that's hungry, that's willing to be coached, which is important, he seems to be a great hire and a great fit. And doesn't mean that he'll forever be the coach of the Fire, right? That's just like the nature of this industry. I don't want to like force your hand, but I'm curious, as someone who has been around the team, and a lot of what I've tried to do as someone who covers the league at large is figure out like likely outcomes with different teams and ceilings and floors and all of that. And it's hard to say, and we're only 11 games into the season, but 25%, so decent way there. What seems to be the kind of a expectation, even from your perspective internally? Like, is this a playoff team? Is this a team that's just kind of happy to be there and it's all house money? Like, would you be surprised if they did or didn't make the playoffs at this point? Like, what do you kind of make of this 11, the 6-5 start? Certainly feels like they could, make the playoffs and a difficult out, but it's also just tough because it's not like they've been dominating teams for the most part, right? So yeah, what do you kind of make of them so far?
I don't think it's off the table that they make the playoffs, which if you had asked me that after the opener and after the preseason, I would have, I told you, I thought going into the season, they were going to be lucky to get to 10 wins and they were going to be right, in the mix to try to get Juju. And even I was like, this is kind of my fault. Like I made this same mistake with the Blazers 2 years ago. After their first, the first year without Dame, which they won 21 games. Going into the next year, they pretty much ran the same roster back, except for trading for Denny, which like people didn't know how good he was going to be at the time. And Chauncey was going into a contract year, and that was a whole thing. And and also like with the Cooper Flag draft coming up, I was going into that season like, yeah, they're going to tank again. They're going to be bad. They're going to try to get Cooper Flag. And then they made that run in the second half of the season. And during that whole run, I was still like resisting so hard, being like, nope, okay, they won a couple games. This is cute. This is fun. But like, they're not actually good. Like, come on, like, what are we doing here? And then, they end up going 18-13 or whatever they ended up going, or 23-18 actually, in the second half of the season. And then, it took me so long to kind of be like, okay, maybe this team actually is just like pretty decent. And I'm kind of trying to guard against, like, it's funny because with the Fire, it's like, it was kind of the same thing where it's like, okay, they had that game against the Liberty and it's like, great, cool moment. They got their first win. They did it against, what we thought at the time was a contender. Obviously, they kind of have their own issues right now, but a team like that, they have this great iconic moment with Sarah Ashlee's, buzzer beater, but like, okay, that's cool. And then they get blown out the next game by the Liberty. And it's like, okay, this is more back what it was going to be. And then they go on this road trip and they have this blowout win over Toronto. And then they have another win against the Liberty. And then they come home and even though it is against Connecticut, they still beat Connecticut. And then, they have that game against Indy. And at a certain point, I have to just kind of step back and be like, okay, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe this team actually is pretty good. And like, you look at like the way that they, like, I think they're so good in these close games. I mean, it's actually really funny. Like, so they lose pretty handily to Golden State last night. They've lost 5 games. All 5 of their losses have been by 15 or more points. Like, they've gotten when they lose big. They don't like, if they get into a close game, they're going to, find a way to close it out. But like they when they're losing, it's like, okay, they just don't have it tonight. Or in the case of Golden State, like Golden State literally just made everything from 3. So it's like, this is like a super long-winded way of saying that, like, I've kind of learned my lesson and I've just like given up thinking that I know whether a team is going to be good or bad. And I don't think it's completely off the table that they make the playoffs. I think some of these teams that are, have struggled, are kind of going through some rough patches right now, like New York and Indy and some of these other teams. I kind of default to thinking that some of those teams are going to get it figured out and then it's going to be a little bit of a regression. But it took so long, I think, for people to finally accept that Golden State was going to be a playoff team last year. And then they just kept winning, that I'm totally willing to buy that, in the case of both Portland and Toronto, it's like, maybe you just can't assume an expansion team's going to be bad anymore. Maybe that's just not how you have to approach this stuff.
And I'd imagine that if you're on the Fire, like that's the goal for this season because it seems feasible. I'm looking at the standings right now. Right now they're in the 8th seed, so they're right on the cusp. And there's a couple of teams that just seem unlikely to turn things around. Like the Connecticut Sun have been pretty bad. Phoenix, I have no words.
I don't know what's going on with that, but and that's who Portland plays next on Friday. By the way, their next two games are Phoenix and LA, so it's like they should be able to get a couple wins, like
right. And then Seattle, I think this is a rebuilding player development year. Chicago, since the Rakea Jackson injury, they've now lost 5 in a row. They were really fun to watch the first few games, but the roster doesn't really make as much sense now. So those 4 teams, I don't want to say they're out of the playoff race, but I'd be surprised if any of them made some noise. Even the Sparks, like this Kelsey Plum injury is not good time. Timed. They're 4 and 5. They've lost 2 in a row. I could see them making a push. The other 2 teams that are right now out of the playoff race are the Mystics and the Fever. And I'm with you on the Fever. I think that I would pick them over the Fire even to like get it together, just considering the talent on that roster. So it's definitely not like a shoe-in, but I would not be surprised if they find their way in. And that's really fun. I'd love to see either Portland or Toronto make the playoffs. I think it's a good thing for the expansion franchises to have like a playoff series in their first year. And just in general, like obviously there's always the upside of tanking and getting a good draft pick. But when you're trying to like really build energy and momentum around a new team, I think it's so much better to take the approach of like, well, obviously everybody wants to win, right? But like they have clearly been as competitive as they possibly can be, and the city obviously appreciates that. So I've enjoyed watching them. I've enjoyed kind of learning a little bit more about them from you. Anything else you want to say about this team before you get out of here? Anything you want to plug from your own work?
Yeah, well, it's been a lot of fun I'll put it this way. I've been having a lot more fun covering the Fire lately than I have covering the Blazers for reasons you've probably seen in the headlines about, ownership and coaching stuff and whatever else. Yeah. And, having to act like this Giannis stuff is a real possibility. Like, this has been a lot. Like, I would be losing my mind right now if I didn't have the Fire stuff to. So it's like, okay, this is like, I actually there's all this, stuff going on with the Blazers right now. That's maybe not the greatest stuff. And it's also kind of this slow time of the year where, especially like this year, the Blazers don't have a draft pick. So I can't even really do the pre-draft stuff like I do. Well, yeah, because they gave their pick to Chicago because they made the playoffs. It was a whole thing. But like, now it's like, okay, cool. I've got this other team to cover that's a lot more fun, and the vibes are just positive, and everybody's really happy, and everybody really likes watching them. And they've got this unconventional coach that everybody really likes that's like getting attention around the league. And it's all these kind of players that nobody really thought anything of before this season. And now they're all doing like, it's just, everything is just 100, like even if I were to be like trying to like write, negative or critical stuff about the Fire right now, I don't even know what I would do, because like what would even be the thing you would say about this Fire team that's like not fully positive? Even if they were losing a lot, it's like, okay, you're an expansion team, you're supposed to lose, you're expected to lose. But it's like, no, it's actually just this fun thing. They're winning more than expected. Everyone likes the coach. It's a cool thing. The vibes of the arena are great. So it's been a fun little like breath of fresh air for me. And I also just like, it's also been fun for me because like I've been covering the NBA for so long, and I know so much about how it all works on the inside, and you get kind of jaded with that stuff. I still like, I have a pretty good handle, I think, on the entire W, but I don't know it still as like, I've been following the league like, day to day, like really, intently for probably 2 or 3 years now, since I found out Portland was going to get a team, as opposed to the NBA, which I had been covering professionally for almost 15 years at this point. So it's also fun for me because like, I'm still in the process of learning like this league with different personalities that I haven't like known about my whole, like for 2 decades, and different coaches and just different, like the histories of different teams and stuff. And so it's just been more fun for me to kind of, I'm learning about this stuff alongside, covering the team on a day-to-day basis. So that part of it's been really fun for me, as well as just, how fun the team is itself. So I've been really enjoying it. And as far as my, the work, it's just kind of the same as everything else. rosegardenreport.com. Go subscribe. Blazers and Fire coverage all on one platform. That's just kind of what I would tell you. I'm on all the social media platforms, but I don't post on there a whole lot for, for obvious reasons, because it's just like don't really get a lot out of that, but you can follow me on there if you want to. But I would just say go subscribe and, check the site out for, again, Blazers and Fire coverage.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I appreciate it. And I love independent coverage. I think it's kind of the way of the future with how this industry has gotten. And definitely resonate with you on I think I wouldn't compare the Celtics to the Blazers, but just in general, NBA offseason is just not as fun. Like, I don't like to do the whole trade rumor thing all summer. And so I'm so grateful that I cover the WNBA as well as the Celtics so that I can watch basketball and talk about basketball in the offseason. So I've had the same thought process as you of like, I'm really glad that I don't have to just do new Jaylen Brown Giannis report every day and have that be my job. So,
or which assistant coach is the owner trying to pay $1.5 million a year to, or whatever else. Yeah.
But in any case, thank you so much for joining. It's been a fun conversation, fun to talk. Portland Fire. They've been one of the fun teams in the league to watch. If you are a viewer, let us know what you thought in the comments section. And check out we had an episode yesterday with James Boyd of The Athletic talking Indiana Fever, so check that out as well. Model of this podcast is just to have as many knowledgeable people coming on to talk about their team so we can kind of get a good sense of what's going on around the league. So hope you enjoy. Thanks so much, Sean. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have you back on at some point.
Yeah, of course.